Welcome to City and State TV. I'm editorial director Michael Johnson, and I'm joined today by Shola Olatoye, the chair and CEO of NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority. Thank you for coming back.
Thank you, Michael, for the invitation.
Oh yeah, it's great to have you here, and we had you here right before Next Generation NYCHA was released. You talked to us, the day before. I think the actual plan was rolled out. Talked through about what the goals were for that. Give us an update of how it's gone. Sure. It's been about 5 months now, right?
Sure. Well, as you said, it's been exactly 5 months. We have officially released our plan, Next Generation NYCHA, which is our 10-year strategic investment plan to do two goals: really set the authority on a sustainable financial path so that we can preserve our most precious asset, which is our public housing. And so there are 15 strategies that are not the kitchen sink, but really strategic focus areas that will do a couple things. One, reduce expenses. Two, raise revenues. And three, help us reinvest those revenues back into our portfolio so that we can ultimately address our significant $17 billion capital need. So in the past 5 months, I've done a number of things, including giving birth to a plan and a child. Yes. We have been incredibly busy. We, as you know, last summer initiated a series of conversations in 3 communities throughout the city where we really kicked off our commitment to the Mayor's Affordable Housing Plan in Ingersoll, Millbrook, and in the Van Dyke, Brownsville neighborhood. Really pleased to say those conversations were really dynamic, really interesting, resulted in a series of community vision plans, which then informed a solicitation that went out on the street. We had, at the Bidders Conference, over 160 developers come out to learn more information, learn about the project. We received 25 responses as of September 30th, and so we're in the process of reviewing those responses now. We released our My NYCHA app, our first foray into the app world, where residents now can really do 2 things. One, have information at their fingertips about outages in their buildings, alerts in terms of emergency alerts as it relates to their surrounding development, but most importantly, actually schedule work according to their schedule, not ours. So really putting the power in the customer's hands around scheduling work according to their own schedules. We have had, I think, more than 7,000 people download the app on both the Android and iPhone devices, and are really seeing a huge uptick in usage of the app to schedule work. To much fanfare, we began a series of additional conversations or idea sessions in 2 communities where we kicked off our 50-50 development, which is the sort of second leg of our development strategy, where we have committed to continuing to preserve affordability while also raising some much needed revenue for the authority. So we kicked off those conversations in 2 communities: the NYCHA development, where I just came from, which is in the Boerum Hill neighborhood of downtown Brooklyn, and Holmes development, which is on the Upper East Side. And while really began, again, a very different way of engaging with residents: door knocking, lobby meetings, stair hall meetings, community room meetings, where we really are working with existing resident leaders, but also trying to engage residents who may not come to a resident association meeting and say, look, did you know that Holmes has a $47 million capital need today, $20 million of which are apartments in kitchens and baths? How do we tackle that? We don't have those resources. Let's engage together around what we want to see happen here at this development and how this revenue can help support and address those repairs and ultimately preserve your home.
And I wanted to talk to you about that development. I want to talk about NYCHA as well. I know that you've done a lot of outreach. You did a lot of outreach before you launched Next Generation NYCHA. You're doing a lot of outreach now. Some of it's good, or it's all good to do the outreach, but you get some positive feedback, you get some negative feedback. You've had some negative press from the NYCHA and from the homes developments where tenants have been concerned with gentrification, with the idea that, trading the land that's there for development of projects is going to not help them and their lives and their communities. They would much rather you just invested in the improvements of these those facilities and of their homes. So where's the gap, I guess, for you to communicate to those people who do have these concerns? And obviously, and then also this next step would be to communicate to the press that this is not maybe the only feedback you're getting from those communities.
Mm-hmm. So look, by definition, an engagement process is dynamic. Doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with you. Certainly, that hasn't been the case. But I think it's important to sort of start where you started, which is say these communities are already gentrified. We're talking about the Upper East Side of Manhattan and Brougham Hill, where the average home prices are already in the millions of dollars. So our plan, if anything, actually is a bulwark to gentrification, and is really about ensuring additional affordability for families at 60% area median income and below, and while also raising revenues for the authority. Look, I would love for us to think that more money from Washington or even the state would actually come to us. That isn't the case. That's not the reality that we have right now. I have, a $17 billion capital need that we are trying to, in a very straightforward and transparent way, say we got to come up with some new solutions, and the status quo isn't one of them. So, bring your ideas. Let's have that conversation, but let's first understand. Let's try and establish a fact base, and I think that's been what has been so important to me. As I said, I just came from Wyckoff, where I sat with resident leaders from Wyckoff, from Warren Street, from Gowanus, and what they said is they said, this has never happened from NYCHA in the sense of coming with facts and saying, here is the capital plan or the capital need or physical needs assessment for Wyckoff. Here is what is entailed in a $47 million capital need. That's never happened before. So arming people with information I think is really important. Listen, lots of people stand to gain by scaring people, which I think is really reprehensible, because there isn't another plan out there, right? There isn't another opportunity to really try and protect what's happening in people's home and ultimately protect the city's last bastion of true affordable housing. We'd all like things to go back to the way they were. That's not the reality of what we have right now.
And you talked about the 60% AMI, which I think that some people have raised that concern. I think that's like 46,000 around that range.
That's right.
There's concerns that people who make 50,000 would not be available to have these apartments going forward. 50,000, not a lot of money to live in the Upper East Side or in Brooklyn. So is there some level of concern, or is that one of the situations where you have to explain like this is what we have to do, and if you make too much money, maybe you don't. You're not eligible for this anymore.
Look, the mayor has committed to build or preserve 200,000 units of housing throughout the city, of which our plan is a part. We have committed to build 10,000 units, which are 100% affordable, available to people up and down the income band. Mm-hmm. The 50/50 initiative is, again, a very clear policy choice. 50% of those units being targeted to families at $46,000, 60% AMI, which is $46,000. That's incredibly. That's a tough income to live on anywhere in this city. And we're saying we're building those. We're going to partner with developers to build those units, in neighborhoods that have long since gentrified, in addition to raising some revenues for the authority. So I think it's about giving people facts, giving people an opportunity to share their ideas, addressing their real concerns, right? One of the things that the residents in Wyckoff just talked about is, they just lost their laundromat and they just lost their store. Look, I think those are very real concerns that residents have every right to voice those concerns, and I think it makes the process for potential developers even more dynamic, because we have to say, look, one of the things that this community really needs is neighborhood serving retail. So let's make sure that we see that as part of the solicitation that goes out to developers.
Do you find that this is just, or do you feel like this is just the fear of change? Is this the kind of thing, and that's what you're trying to overcome by doing this community outreach?
Absolutely. Look, the only constant is change, and And I think, anytime we sort of talk about, development in this city, that incites a whole series of potential fears. And so part of it is just addressing those fears right on. I was walking out of the community center at Wyckoff, and a woman said, "I'll be at the meeting on Monday as long as no one's going to kick me out of my home." I said, "This is not about kicking people out of your home. This is about protecting your home." She said, "Okay." So I think it is just addressing those fears head on, giving people facts, then being very clear about the process going forward. Look, we don't have the resources to address the $17 billion capital need. The status quo is not acceptable. We have got to do things differently. And it's not just about developing on land, it's also about changing the way we do business, right? So improving our core business of being a landlord, making sure that we're responding to people's requests in a timely way, making sure that our developments are cleaner, making sure that we are partnering with NYPD around issues of safety, which is obviously a huge concern given the events of this week.
Of course.
So that's why this plan is a sum of its parts. There's no one thing that's going to help achieve our goals of a sustainable NYCHA. It really has to be done as a comprehensive approach.
And I think that one thing that I've seen a lot in the city over the last decade, even like 5 years. Obviously Mayor Bill de Blasio was elected in part because of the kind of a populist message, this idea that there was a divide between the rich and the poor. And I think that some people are seeing what's happening as a kind of a giveaway to corporations to some level. I think that this is kind of maybe driving the fear a little bit. Are you seeing that or hearing that, or do you feel like that's what's coming from the residents who are pushing back against the idea of gentrifying or giving away certain NYCHA lands to do development?
So I guess I reject the premise of your question, which is to say, one, I think residents ultimately and New Yorkers are all concerned about having an affordable place to live, right? More than half of New Yorkers spend more than half of their income are truly cost burden, not just people who live in, who live in public housing or affordable housing. New York is an expensive place to live. So I think in general, that's a fear that people have. And I think what our plan presents very clearly is a bulwark to that, which is to say in neighborhoods that have long since gentrified, where the average home price is $2 million, we're saying we're going to create affordable rental housing for families who make a maximum of $46,000. That isn't happening in other places, right? That is what this mayor and this administration is putting a very clear stake in the ground. So look, New York is a city that is constantly changing. Even in the 20 years that I've been here, it has changed drastically, and it will continue to change. I think what we are trying to do, what the administration is trying to do, is to say the Housing Authority, New York City Housing Authority, is truly the city's last bastion of true affordable housing. We house more than half of the city's extremely low-income families. We are at a crisis point. Our buildings are literally crumbling around us. In order for us to ensure that that resource is around for another generation, we got to do some things differently.
And well, to that point, I guess the bigger part of my question was that if you look historically, you look at like kind of Mayor Bloomberg proposed a similar thing, but it was 80-20. So I think that the residents of the NYCHA, housing projects would see that and say, okay, like Bloomberg proposed something, we didn't like it then. Now you guys are proposing something that's clearly different if it's 50-50. But like, it's that same kind of concept of you're trying to make NYCHA sustainable with the added revenue, but for the residents there, they're like, oh, Michael Bloomberg tried this, now Bill de Blasio is trying this. I think that's the narrative that we're hearing play out a little bit, and maybe it's overplayed out in certain press outlets, but I just thought that was kind of where maybe some of the fear was coming from.
Look, at the end of the day, there's no magic bullet.
Yeah.
And I think, that's why our plan is a very clear-headed plan, right? There is, there are very specific things that need to be done here. You don't have enough money coming in, you have old buildings. You have an asset, you got to figure out how to monetize it. That's the end of the day. What this mayor has said is we need to ensure affordability in neighborhoods that have already become, where people have already been priced out. And I think that's a very different approach than the previous administration, while also raising revenues for the authority, while also changing the way we are doing business, while also saying, it is not acceptable that, you know, our developments are not clean, and that our developments don't have lighting, and that our developments, you know, are paying for police services unlike, you know, any other large developer. So there's a very clear policy shift that is not just about raising revenue. It's really about changing the way we do business as the city's largest landlord. And in order to do that, you're going to have a diverse revenue base, and yes, development is part of that equation.
A couple more minutes left, but I wanted to ask you quickly about, there's the Greg Smith report last week about the $250,000 study, and obviously this was his reporting. I'm not sure that, you know, this has been confirmed or put out there, but there was a $250,000 study about gentrification and the impacts it would have on NYCHA residents. And the piece was basically presented as, you know, and obviously Councilman Richie Torres spoke about this as well and said that it seemed like a waste of money, and that to some level. I just want to give you a chance to respond to that that story that came out and see if, and maybe put it into context, because.
So I think context and facts are really important. One, it was a city's paid-for study, not a NYCHA study. Two, the research question was, what's the impact of public housing residents who are already in neighborhoods that have gentrified? That was the research question. And I think the results were really quite interesting, and should not be so easily sort of cast aside because of some very real anxiety that residents might feel about the loss of their local bodega or laundromat, et cetera. There were a couple things. One, the children of those public housing residents go to better schools. Two, the incomes of those families are higher. So if you look at any of the research around poverty and around what it takes to alleviate poverty, it's jobs and education. And I think that those are sort of two really important results that shouldn't be lost in the noise of some of the other real concerns. And so that's why I think our plan and the work that we've been engaged in engaging with residents has been not just about, let's talk about your development, but what about the issues in your community that you're concerned about? So in the Ingersoll community, one of the things that came out of the visioning conversations there were some of the seniors were really concerned that the local grocery store didn't deliver to them. And so they organized, and now the grocery store delivers to them, right? So there are very real, I think, community quality of life issues that residents have every right to have concerns about in neighborhoods that have already gentrified. But I think the outcomes of your children go to a better school, and that your overall household income is actually higher, I think those are really important results that should not be cast aside.
Good. And finally, I hope you come back in 6 months and give us another update.
Absolutely.
In 6 months, where would you like to see with this project? Obviously, you know, where would you like to go over the next 6 months?
In 6 months, we are going to be on our way to reducing our overall central office deficit, which is one of our strategies as part of NextGenerationNYCHA. We will have on the street, and if not, have responses back from our first set of 50/50 developments. We will have selected developers for our affordable development as well. We will continue to drive down service levels of our existing work orders, and we'll be launching some pretty significant operational changes and reorganization efforts as well.
Great. Well, we'll hopefully have you back then. So, Olatoye, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for the invitation.